Finding it a bit hard to get fired up about this one so far. Anyway, it may change over the weekend for two reasons. One, because Bahrain as a circuit seems to be becoming a little bit more boring with every year. I think that's because cornering speeds and downforce are improving, increasing. And certainly that lovely section of road, turn 9, 10, is not particularly spectacular now. Everybody seems to be doing it correctly, going around on the outside, touching the marbles almost, and then just breaking into 10 with a nice flat braking zone. And that's because they've all got so much grip now going through 9 at high speed. That wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago. So that corner is no longer as dramatic as it used to be. And where else is there in Bahrain? It's all about high-speed braking. It was quite funny, I thought, to hear Oliver Behrman saying that he's very confused by the last corner. Good to see a driver admitting that. He's a nice, humble guy, Oliver. Got a lot of time for him. Quite sure what he meant by being confused. I mean, it's dead straight, then it goes right. But I can see what he means in a way, because it's slightly quicker than a 90-degree corner, yet it is a sort of 90-degree corner, if you get my gist. But apart from that, the other reason it's quite difficult to get fired up about the weekend is because, well, if you're a McLaren fan, you'll be very fired up because McLaren-Mercedes at the moment have a massive advantage over the field. Now, Max Verstappen was complaining initially of bouncing. He didn't run in the first session. That was given over to a lot of rookies. And why not? Because the first session in Bahrain is run at a different time of the day to the race, and what we saw in the second session is much more commensurate with qualifying in the race. So that was obviously the time. Although you've got to raise the question here with Alpine, why on earth didn't they run a rookie here instead of at Suzuka, where Jack Doohan, of course, needed all that seat time on a very difficult circuit? The answer, of course, is that Ryo Hirakawa, being Japanese, had to run in Japan and was bringing a lot of money to the team, even though it resulted ultimately in that shunt on Friday afternoon. Nonetheless, I think they still probably covered costs, probably ahead of the game, I would think, Nate Flav. Anyway, getting back to the point, Max didn't run, like several others in the first session. Didn't really matter that much, you thought. When he came out, he had bouncing problems. The car was all over the place. And then when he was doing his long run, he said he didn't really have a great feel from the brake pedal at high speed. So if Max has brilliant brakes tomorrow, it's possible, of course, he's going to be a lot nearer the McLarens. Personally, I doubt it. The McLarens look to be so far ahead of the opposition today. And I've been thinking about an easy, simple way to quantify that. And I came up with these stats. I'm not sure they do the job, but have a look at this. This is the long runs. Everybody was out on the track at the end, all 20 cars doing long runs, as you would around Bahrain, because they do a lot of testing there. They know how to operate in Bahrain. But if you look at the long run summary here, there was a mixture of compounds chosen between the hard, the soft, and the medium. And I've put them in the order in which they finished the soft run, so you can see basically where they are in terms of lap time at the moment. And then the final number is the number of total laps they did on the long run. So they all did pretty good long runs. Oscar Piastri, the only one that actually ran two different compounds of the quick runners on those long runs, started on the hard, went to the soft. And it looked to me like the sort of benchmark of whether you were going to be quick or not is the 138 barrier with fuel in the car. Of course, we don't know exactly how much fuel each team was running, but because they're all relatively close on lap time, you've got to assume they're all running about the same amount. Well, I'm going to assume that anyway. So Oscar Piastri did 4 laps below 138. It was in the 36s, actually. But let's just keep it to this benchmark here. And 5 on the soft. That's a total of 9. Yep, game over. And Lando Norris stayed on one set. You would expect him, therefore, to do fewer laps under 138, but he still did 5, which is very impressive on the soft tyre. Typical Lando, looking really, really good on the soft tyre. And indeed, just on the consistently long runs. George Russell, 3 on the soft tyre, total of 14 laps. Compare that with Max, 3 on the soft as well, total of 16 laps. But he did have that brake problem, so he said. But we don't know what problems George had as well. But on the face of that, you got to say Red Bull probably, with Max anyway, probably looking like P3 in terms of long run times overall. Charles Leclerc had a reasonably good day, ran the medium for the long runs, so a big gap there to Oscar Piastri. Wasn't that quick, didn't get under 138 at all, did 10 lap run, whereas Lewis Hamilton was on the soft, did 1 lap below the 38s on the soft. Again, a 10-lap run. Not very impressive by Lewis, and of course slower than Charles on the soft tyre as well. And having a few moments just sort of locking up and going straight on and just pushing quite hard. He was actually quite quick right at the beginning. He was quickest for a while in the first 20 minutes of the session, but then it just got away from him, as it has at several other circuits this year so far. Kimi Antonelli, very impressive in the other Mercedes, ran the soft tyre like George, didn't get under 138, but then he is a rookie, come on. 15-lap run as well, looked very consistent, having said all that. And Isack Hadjar, again, phenomenal in the Racing Bulls, to be quicker than, I don't know, Max Verstappen, how's that? But did on the medium tyre, again, no laps under 138. Looked pretty good though, pretty consistent. 13-lap run. Max we've talked about, Lewis we've talked about. Alonso, yeah, 7 laps under 138 on the soft tyre, but there I really do question how much fuel they're running in the Aston Martin, because he wasn't particularly quick on the soft tyre on light fuel, and he lost time anyway and had to change the steering wheel early on, things like that. So we'll discount that for the moment, but I put it in there just because, well, 7 laps under 138, not bad, regardless of how much fuel we're running. Obviously a certain amount of fuel because it was a longish run. And then Yuki Tsunoda not really contributing anything today to Red Bull, I'm afraid. On the medium tyre, so at least Red Bull splitting their options in terms of information. So maybe I need to take a little bit of that back, so they're getting information on the medium tyre, but not particularly quick. 0 laps below 38, as you can see, an 11-lap run. So on the face of that, McLaren-Mercedes just in another class. And it looked that way. Oscar could throw the car around. He was doing his Oscar thing. It's going to be difficult, I think. If Oscar gets the pole, it'll be difficult for Lando to do anything about it. A little bit like China. And has Lando got enough corners here, places around Bahrain, where his slightly softer touch is going to help him in terms of a lap time? It went away from him in sector 3 on the soft tyre today, and they do enough laps for Oscar to be right on it. So I suppose the most dramatic thing that we could be looking forward to as we go into the weekend is this intra-battle between Oscar and Lando again at McLaren, and how McLaren try to solve that. If they're both on the front row of the grid, what are they going to do? There's a bit of a joke going around the paddock at the moment that although Max doesn't have a number 2 who's up there fighting with him, if you like, he does actually have a number 2. And he's called Oscar Piastri, because at the moment he's taking points from Lando Norris, which potentially is still Max's biggest threat in terms of the World Championship. So, yeah, that was the sort of joke going up and down the pit lane today. But, yeah, it looked like, I'm not surprised going to a circuit like Bahrain. They do a lot of testing. And it's not a great circuit in the way that Suzuka was. Very difficult for a guy like Max to do anything very different from the norm in Bahrain. And it's going to be the same story in Saudi Arabia. They get back to Europe, and then possibly there'll be some upgrades on the Red Bull, which might take them a bit nearer the McLaren. But at the moment, in the middle of this triple header, and the circuit like Bahrain and then Saudi Arabia, very, very difficult to see anybody but McLaren dominating these next 2 Grand Prix. So on to something slightly different then, and it is again to talk about REC watches, but on this occasion I'm going to focus on a car which I think most of you will be familiar with, which is the Ford GT40. Unbelievably brilliant race car. It was synonymous in my mind with everything great that happened in the early and mid 1960s, which was sort of triggered by the space race, by John Kennedy saying, our goal, our ambition now, our mission now is to take a man to the moon and get him back safely. And that drove a lot of aspects of life, particularly motorsport and motor racing. If you think about it, drivers like Jack Brabham, Bruce McLaren, Dan Gurney, going off from comfortable rides, going off to do their own thing and start their own race teams, build their own cars, and then to go on to win races with those cars. That was all part of that energy of the 1960s. And the Ford GT was the automotive personification of that, because we had the Ford Mustang from the Ford Motor Company, and that changed the world in terms of what it said about motoring and where it was going. And it was the centerpiece of the World Fair in New York in '65. And Ford Motor Company, having had a policy with Henry Ford of not being in motorsport, suddenly changed everything in the early 60s, 62, and decided to go into motorsport and just dominate it as much as they could, whether it be Le Mans, whether it be Trans Am, Can-Am, winning in NASCAR. They didn't specify Formula One, but of course that did happen within a couple of years through Walter Hayes and his Ford of Europe energy. But Ford decided to come in a big way, and it's difficult now in this world in which we live right now, motorsporting world, to think of Ford being such a big player. But it was absolutely brilliant to see what Ford were doing in so many different areas. Anyway, I mentioned the Mustang because Eric Broadley had done a beautiful car called the Lola GT, which didn't have Ford power, but it was a really nice mid-engine sports car in 62. And Ford saw that and thought, right, that is the basis for the Challenger that we're going to take to Le Mans and try to beat Ferrari. And they gave that initially to the design team that did the Mustang. And that design team, led by Len Bailey, actually, and a couple of others as well, great designer, great English designer, Len Bailey, produced the original first Ford GT. And I should make a point here, which is that in 64, when the Ford GT first appeared at Le Mans, in the test and then at Le Mans, and then in 65, throughout 65, and indeed in 66, for most of 66, the car was not known as the Ford GT40. The GT40 only began its nomenclature when the Ford Mark II was created, which was the 7-litre version of the Ford GT, the car that won Le Mans in 66 with Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, for example. And at that point, to differentiate the 7-litre from the 4.7-litre kind of production Ford GT, they gave the production car the Ford GT40 name. And it's around that production car, the GT40, that a beautiful trio of REC watches have been created from original parts based on GT40s run, first of all, by Shelby American, who were in there right from the start. Shelby American, of course, founded by Carroll Shelby, a Le Mans winner for Aston Martin, based in Venice Beach, California. And regular customers in the Cobra days were Steve McQueen and his like. Anyway, he really got into it very early on with drivers like Bruce McLaren, Chris Amon, Dan Gurney, Jerry Grant, Lloyd Ruby, and scored the first win with Ken Miles at Daytona in 65. The other two teams featured by these watches are Essex Wire and Sid Taylor Racing. Essex Wire, great story. Skip Scott was the son of a US senator, very, very quick. He won a lot of races in Shelby Cobras before he was seconded really by Ford into the GT program. But he Ford with Skip Scott set up a separate company called Essex Wire Racing. Why Essex Wire? Because, quaintly, the Essex Wire company was one of the key suppliers in the days of the Model A Ford. They supplied the electric harness for the car. And the company still existed. So Skip Scott thought, wow, what a cool thing. We'll call it Essex Wire. And so they did. And he was big mates with Peter Revson. Very talented pairing, actually. And they had two very good third places in the SXY GT40. And other drivers like Jackie Ickx were in the car at Le Mans as well. So that's a great history there, and a lovely reflection of both Revy and Skip Scott. And then there's a Sid Taylor Denny Hulme GT40, which some people may not be familiar with, because Sid Taylor Denny Hulme, great combination. But in most people's minds, I think it was that little Brabham BT8 with which he won the Tourist Trophy at Alton Park. And then a lot of races in Lola T70s, Spider and the Mark IIIB as well. Denny Hulme, just fabulous in that Sid Taylor Lola. Ron Bennett preparation, just superb. But in 1967, there was a thing called the Autosport, as in the magazine GT Championship in the UK, which was a really well-supported series, very good number of races, and at all the top British circuits. And the key player there was Paul Hawkins, Hawkeye, the Australian, who had bought a GT40 himself with backing from Jackie Epstein, his mate, from Dan Gurney at the back end of 66. And it was a lightweight car. It was a standard thing made by Ford, but they weren't easy to get in Europe. So Paul brought over this very lightweight GT40, well out of the regulations for this GT championship in Europe, in England. But every time he had to go to scrutineering, the official's attention was diverted somewhere else. And he had a few other bits and bobs on the car as well, which he could easily take off after scrutineering to get things back to proper weight again. So Denny Hulme was actually racing against this very lightweight Paul Hawkins GT40. And Paul had the measure of Denny most of the time, but Denny did win in the Sid Taylor car at Silverstone in the wet. So that watch celebrates that as well. So it's the green for the Sid Taylor Denny Hulme GT40. It's the blue for the Shelby American GT40s. And it's the red and white for the Essex Wire GT40s. Wonderful things. All of those watches are using components from original GT40s that raced in those colors. And you can order them now from REC Watches. I think they're just superb. And if you mention Peter, you do get a 10% discount as well. Anyway, back to business. Well, I say back to business because Bahrain is trudging slowly into the weekend now. We'll see what it brings. If Max has decent brakes tomorrow, it'll be interesting to see where he goes. And Red Bull, as we said in Suzuka when he had understeer on Friday, Red Bull are very good at turning weekends around and getting the car ready to work. And just a final word on top speeds through the trap. I won't bore you with numbers, but basically the Ferraris, Oliver Behrman, Liam Lawson, Hadjar, Yuki Tsunoda, Lewis Hamilton, relatively quick through the trap, but at the other end of the scale, relatively slow through the trap, Max Verstappen and the two McLarens about 6 to 8 kilometers off. So if the two McLarens weren't there, you could say, oh, well, there's Max's problem. But McLaren obviously have so much downforce around the back that they can run a downforce setting on the car, which allows them to protect their tires and do those long runs, as we saw in the stats earlier. So there we are. That's Friday in Bahrain. Bring on the weekend. Let's see what happens there. Thanks for watching, and thanks for those that have sent birthday wishes. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow.